Welcome aspiring data scientists and welcome future Python programmers. Today we have the second lecture about lists in Python. In the previous class we started working with lists. We also know already how we can add elements to a list, and in the end we also learned how we can add two different lists together into one. The key topics of today though are obviously, again, working with lists, but a very important principle which we will learn today is subsetting of lists and the zero indexing principle. Afterwards, we also learn how we can select multiple elements within a list called a range and how we can reproduce them later in a new variable. Now, indexing and subsetting, or we can also call it zero indexing. You have to imagine that every time we create a new list in Python, an index is attached to that list. So basically every element within a list has its own index number. It starts with 0 and goes until the end of the elements. So here on our slide we have the variable again called nameslist, and we know already from the previous lesson that it stores 4 different elements. We can see here the element or value is on the bottom part. We can say that Python automatically attaches an index to each element. So we have here the names list. The first element is Leon, and Leon has the index number 0. Sam has the index number 1, and so on. So why is that useful? Because often we don't actually know really the elements of our list, or we don't really care that much about it. We care much more about the positioning of our elements within the list. So we can directly access the positioning of our elements through using zero indexing and subsetting. Here we subset for our first element within the list, that would be Leon. So we first call the variable nameslist, and then we put in square brackets the index number afterwards. So if we call for 0, we get Leon. If we call for 3, we get Luisa. Now the same approach obviously applies also to a mixed list. So it doesn't matter what kind of elements you have in a list. Each element has their own index. And if we print out, for example, mixed list and then in square brackets index 2, we have Claire. So that is subsetting and zero indexing in Python. Important for you to know that the first element in every list in this world has always the index 0, and afterwards 1, 2, 3 and more. So please don't forget this. So because it's that important, we just make another slide on it. First name again, we have to call the list name or the variable name that we want to have access to. And afterwards, we call the index number or the position of our element that we want to have access to. So here again, we have our list L12, and we would like to access or output or receive back the first element in the list. So we know, okay, first element has always index number 0. So if we use print L12 in square bracket 0, we get A back as our first index number or element. So we can also get the last element within a list, and that is quite easy in Python because you don't actually have to count all individual elements until the end of the list. You can actually just switch the whole game around and use -1 for the last element within the list, or -2 for the second last element within the list. So the curious ones are maybe thinking, okay, maybe I can add a 1, 0 or -0 there, and maybe I get some interesting output then. But believe me, that doesn't work. In the human logic, there is no -0, and in Python's logic, there's also no -0. There's only 1, 0, -1. And that's the logic in Python, and we have to apply that logic. So if we print out the index number -1 of our list L12, we get back 3. And if we search for -2 index number, we get 2. So our second last element within that list. Straightforward, I guess. So now comes also a very important part of Python, and that is selecting a range of elements. So you can either select a single element, but also a range. And we do this again by first calling our list, and afterwards we call our index number again. But this time we don't call for one element, we call for two elements by using the double points in the middle. And then, interestingly, the first index number is always the starting point of your range. And on the right-hand side, the index number is always the finishing or end point of your range. And very, very important, you can never forget that. The starting point is inclusive, so it's part of your range. And the ending point is exclusive, so it's never going to be part of your range. Now, if we apply it here, we can say, okay, I would like to have the elements from 1 until 4. That basically means this part is not inside our list because it doesn't start at index number 0, it starts at index number 1. So everything from 2 on, then we have 3 inside, we have A inside, and B has index number 4. So we know the end is always exclusive, so that means that B will not be included in our range. So overall, if you want to have a range of elements, just first select the name of your list, and afterwards put in square brackets the beginning element or index number and the ending index number. And don't forget that the end is always exclusive, beginning is always inclusive. Now we can also select the range by just giving a starting point and not giving an end point. We do this by just leaving one side of our square brackets empty. So if we want to have everything including from index number 2 until the end, we just put in the square brackets 2 double points empty. If we want to have, for example, all elements from the beginning on until the third last element of the list, we can put in -3. But again, remember that the last element is exclusive. So we here have the list 1, 2, 3 with the third last element excluded of that range. Congratulations, you have finished another Python course. Please don't forget to do the Jupyter Notebook assignment of lists, and we are going to see you in the next video. Bye.